Hey, welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. I'm your host, Coach Zach. I'm here with Coach Brandy and Coach Adam's very first podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Excited.
Is this your first podcast episode ever?
First ever.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, it's fine. Nick, if you screw something up, Nick can cut and edit.
Perfect. We're going 100% either way.
So. No pressure. No pressure. I'm just saying we haven't messed up in a really, really long time. So,
it's good.
It's
good. I'm going to keep it going.
Keeps the streak alive.
Yeah. Today, guys, we are talking about your back. Talking about back injuries, talking about back prehab, how to prevent them, what to do if you have one, all of that. So we're going to break it down for you. But like always, we do have a client of the week. We like to give a shout out to one of our members. And this week, I'd like to give a shout out to actually a couple, Jenny and Ted Lyles, who train in the mornings with us. And they come in, they work hard, they get after it, but they're just amazing people to have in your community. I think one thing that kind of separates us as a gym, and I'm sure there's, lots of gyms that kind of have this, but with us, it's very authentic and it's very deep, is we have a really great community of members, and lots of long-term relationships are created and bonds are created here in our facility. And there's such a just like positive force towards like having a great community. They're sort of like catalysts for that. And so I wanted to give them a shout out and just say like, hey guys, we, love and appreciate that. And keep doing what you're doing. Keep up the hard work.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. We're going to talk about the back today. I personally, I've shared on this podcast numerous times that I've got my own back issues. I refuse to go get an MRI or find out exactly what's going on, because no matter what, I'm not going to let it dictate or stop me. But there are lots of things that I have learned, just through experience and educating myself on, here's what irritates me, here's what doesn't irritate me, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, here's what happens if I don't do the things that I'm supposed to do to make sure that I'm not in pain. And I think that is something that's really important to kind of set the groundwork for this episode, is when it comes to the back, it's very individualized. You think like, hey, I messed my knee up, and the knee is a joint and it's complex, but you have the spine, which is like basically 33 joints, 33 vertebrae. And depending on where an injury is, what's irritated, you have so many nerves that's your spinal cord. It's the central nervous system. You have so many nerves that are branching out of that area into every other area of your body. And so depending on where there's an injury really dictates what the protocol is, what you should avoid, what you can do, what you should do. It's really independent around the person. And so, what we're talking about today in terms of prehab, not so much. Like, yeah, obviously we want to be safe and prevent any injury. But if you do have a back injury, knowing where it is and what exactly the issue is will determine whether some of the things that we share with you are going to help or hurt.
Yeah.
And so there's no like one size fits all.
And I think sometimes too, someone may feel back pain, but that may be a result of something else that's going on, like tight hamstrings or an issue with the hips. So you may feel it in your back, but it could be stemming from somewhere else as
Yeah,
well.
It doesn't necessarily mean like you injured a disc or something like that. So that's a really good point. And I would probably say for people that have they're very sedentary, like they're not working out, they're not playing sports, they're not super active. Most likely if you have back pain, it's not stemming from a back injury, it's stemming from those other things. Mm-hmm. It's stemming from like tight hip flexors and being in a seated position with your knees bent and you're hinged at the hip all day long.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's one of the, like you mentioned prehab, the prehab things that people can do to prevent back pain or back injuries is avoid long periods of sitting, without any movement. So if you do have a job or you're in school and you, are sitting for most of the day, take breaks where you can get up and move and walk and get out of that position throughout the day. That's one of the things to do to maintain a healthy back. And then when you are sitting, make sure that you have good posture. And then there are other things that we'll get into, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think in the post-COVID world, the COVID it actually kind of separated people into a couple of buckets. You had your people that were at home but trying to be super active because they had the time or whatever, the only activities were outdoors, or you had the people that became super sedentary and were sitting around and but discovering these postural issues that can, kind of radiate throughout the rest of the body. So I think posture is kind of an underrated or not super realized, and maybe some people have come to that idea now or kind of realizing it. And, I think the core, people see core as, something that's often really aesthetic. And I think it's something that needs to be structurally strong. Then that has a huge effect on back health.
Yeah.
And, everyone's looking for the 6-pack, which I've never had in my life. But,
oh, man. Say it ain't so.
Yeah.
You just let all the ladies
let
down.
it all out. Sorry. But, having that strong trunk, that strong core is something that definitely affects the back and, overall health there, and even just exercise selection, like when you're in the gym, what you can and can't do, depending on core strength. So.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of different things we can talk about there. But you mentioned COVID, and people, kind of like being like, hey, I'm at home, I got to be super active, or, now I'm working from home,
right.
And ergonomically sitting on the couch with a laptop on their lap in a horrible position.
Right.
And then that can lead to a bunch of issues. I know personally for me, like if I stand for too long at my desk, it starts to hurt my back. If I sit for too long, it starts to hurt my back. I have to go like up and down, and prevent myself from kind of being like, from rigor mortis setting in and me being like, okay, I'm stuck in this position. And then, and as long as I'm aware of it, I'm conscious of it, and I change positions throughout the day, I don't really have any issues. But if it's like, okay, I had a day where I was on a bunch of Zoom calls, because I like to stand during my Zoom calls and I'm coaching and stuff. And if I have like back to back Zoom calls, by the time I'm done with like 3-4 hours of those, I'm like, okay, I need to sit and take the load off here. But you mentioned like training, right? And what you can do and what you can't do. Number one kind of thing I want people to understand, because you hear this like, is this exercise bad for my back? Is this exercise bad for my back? With our spine, it's designed to bend in, forward, backward, laterally, side to side, and rotate. And there's never any issues with movement, free movement. Where there starts to become some issues is when you're loaded. So there's load, meaning like weight on your spine, either from the top down or from the bottom up. And then our spine isn't stacked. Mm-hmm. And so like I can lean forward, for everybody that's listening and not watching, like I can lean forward and bend at my hip and keep my spine perfectly stacked and in alignment. Not going to cause any issues to any of the discs there. Right. I'm not going to do any damage. However, I also have the ability to like curl, meaning tuck my chin and bring my shoulders and round like a crunch, and contract my core, which is perfectly fine unloaded. But then if I load that, it's putting a lot of pressure on my discs, and it's very likely that I'm going to create some damage, meaning like a bulged disc, possibly a herniation. But even a bulged disc, like because of the amount of nerves that you have running through your spine, that bulge is then probably going to create some sort of impingement. It becomes inflamed, and then it starts to irritate the surrounding nerves. And then that's where we start to get radiating pain and numbness down the leg, or depending on what disc it is, those nerves all go different places. Right. So I could have pain down my leg, all the way into my toe. I could have it down my shoulder. I could have it, in my rib cage. It's just, there's an not infinite, but many places it could potentially go and radiate. So, what else, Brandy?
Well, I think that's important. And, knowing those things that can cause, those issues to flare up, or if you have something going on with your back, you can continue moving, you can continue exercising, strength training, just know what the limitations are, and the coaches can help you work through that. So maybe you can't put a heavy barbell on your back, but you can hold a kettlebell or a dumbbell and do like a goblet style squat. So there are always modifications that can occur so that you can move in a safe way and not re-injure yourself or further cause damage to the spine if there is something going on.
Yeah. Kind of to piggyback that a little bit, I like to go through kind of like a mental checklist almost, because you're in the gym and doing the actual repetitions, you can just fall into that kind of pattern of just going through it, but you want to be able to like mentally engage also. People talk about that mind muscle connection, and I kind of start from the ground up and obviously make your way to the back, which is super important. So people ask that question, is this going to be bad for my back or something like that? As long as you're kind of going through that checklist and finding that way to either find a way to engage your core or stabilize something that we're not going to give you anything that's going to be bad for you, right? So you just need to go kind of through that checklist, like I said, and just make any adjustments that you have to, or just mentally be aware, kind of like you were talking about, of just, position, where am I trying to feel this? What is the one thing I don't want to do here? And, everything kind of falls into place, and you're able to do essentially everything. Even with an injury, sometimes there's ways around it.
Yeah. And so you kind of circle back to the core, which I'm super happy about, because I was like one of the directions we could have gone. So you talked about like the core from an aesthetic standpoint versus like I guess function standpoint. And one of the things that I think people tend to miss is what it actually means to like brace properly when we're going to do an exercise. So, number one priority when we're in the gym is stabilizing at the joint, right? So if we're thinking about the spine being like essentially 33 different joints and our vertebrae all move in different ways, it's like, well, I want to stack that and I want it to be very, very stable. And then I want to perform an exercise. Okay. Same way we also want to prioritize like stability through our shoulder joints or through our knee joints. But with the back, one of the kind of cues I think that gets missed is a lot of times people brace by like pushing their belly out, which is actually the wrong approach. We want to expand the belly laterally, meaning into our obliques and like out the sides. And so before we would do a squat or a deadlift, it's really important to, I guess a cue for this would be like, hey, fill your belly up with oxygen, but instead of pushing the belly out, let's think about pushing the obliques out to the sides. And then I can't really, if I'm doing that, I can't do that and put my spine in a compromised position at the same time. I guess I could from the neck. But from from like my neck down, there's no way for me to really, create any issues. So, also with the spine, one thing to mention here, and then I'll go back to you guys. Your spinal cord moves up and down through your vertebrae. And so, if I tuck my chin, my spinal cord is moving roughly an inch, kind of depending on the person, up, right? It's being pulled up. If I need to bend my leg and pull my knee to my chest or extend my leg out forward like I was going to kick, my spinal cord is moving down. No problem, right? And so we should have good movement with our spinal cord. Now, obviously, if we have a disc herniation or something, that's where, because those nerves coming off of the spinal cord are happening in those individual vertebrae around that area, that's where certain movements start to create issues. And so just so you kind of get a picture of the anatomy here of what we're talking about, and depending on like, again, where that injury is, a squatting motion might not cause any problems whatsoever, and a deadlift will. Yeah. So pulling weight off of the ground, or it could be the opposite of that, where one is causing problems, one isn't causing problems. So like you said, as far as from a training standpoint, it's like, yeah, we can brace, we can put ourselves in these good positions to make sure we're not going to have any injuries. If we do have an injury, well, there's probably something that we can still do. One of those exercises, right, we're probably going to be fine. It's just identifying for each person which one we're capable of doing, and then we can be safe and we can continue to train even though you have a back injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we do throughout our programming is we do, foam rolling and trigger point work. And that's really important, one, for prevention of back pain. But if there is something going on with the back, then that can help to relieve some of that pain too. So maintaining flexibility throughout the spine and mobility throughout, out all of the joints in the body can help prevent anything from occurring, and then can also help deal with any issues that may occur within the back. Also, so we talked about strengthening the core. A lot of times, weak hamstrings or weak glutes or weak hip flexors can contribute to back pain as well. So, we can work with you on, helping to strengthen those muscles throughout the body to help support the spine.
Yeah. And one thing that we did for our listeners, like, I think next week we're going to talk a little bit more about like periodization and different phases of training and stuff. But being strong is really important for our members. It's really important for longevity. And several years ago, we always go through a strength phase every like, I guess it'd be 9 weeks. We cycle back to a strength phase. And one thing that we had happen several years ago is we noticed that our members were sustaining a lot of back injuries. And by a lot, I mean, over the course of a year, we had about 10, which is way, way more than you want to have with your members. Now, was that caused by us, or was it like the straw that broke the camel's back? Because with the back, you could go, do a bunch of yard work and then come in here and then do a deadlift. And it's like, man, that one rep or that one twist. I mean, everybody knows, like, you feel perfectly fine. And then you reached into your trunk to grab some groceries and it's like, boom, you hit the ground and you're like, what'd I do? All I did was reach in the trunk. So it's really hard to kind of isolate, where, like, what was the cause, mm-hmm. that actually created this issue. But if somebody's sitting for a long period of time or they're doing those things outside of the gym and then they come in here, even if their form's perfect, it could still be hey, that was too much and your body couldn't sustain it anymore. And boom, we have, a back injury, or some sort of spasm or something like that, mm-hmm. where it's like, okay, that's going to take a little bit of time to recover from. Anyway, long story short, what we did is we started implementing a lot more corrective exercises and prehab exercises into our programming. And we saw back injuries go from 10 a year to 1, which is pretty incredible. Like it's a small sample size, but 90% decrease because we were more preventative in our approach. And so a lot of times our members, they complain because with the warm up, it's like, okay, we got glute bridges or glute bridge march or hamstring bridge march, and we got mini bands. And it's like, there's a reason why we're doing that. We're doing it because we want to prevent you from getting injured. And when you get injured, it's like a major setback for your body comp, from a mental standpoint, from momentum, also from a strength. I mean, you won't lose too much strength, but as long as you continue and we work around it. but why get injured at all, right? If there are little things that we can add into our programming, in the warm up when it's like, we got to do that anyway, then those are the things that like we're absolutely going to do to make sure that you stay safe and healthy and you're prepared for whatever life throws at you, plus your training program too. So those are things like, work, like you said, Brandy, working on the hip flexors, working on our glute medius and minimus, and maybe smaller muscles that we would use for stability or things that don't fire well. And so everybody's kind of got, it has their strengths and weaknesses. Like you see like people with no butts, right? Like, sorry, there's people with no butts. And then you see people with like giant butts. You see people, the person with no butt is most likely using their hamstrings, like they're hamstring dominant and their glutes don't fire well. A lot of times it's the opposite for the person with the big glutes and like they don't fire their hamstrings well. So we can actually work on those things because those are compensations, and the more balanced and the better everything fires in the correct sequence, less risk of injury.
Right.
I think getting to that word balance too, it's like you touched on it a little bit with your grocery story. It's like, you don't just have to lift things correctly when you're in the gym as well.
That's a good point.
Like, I think that's a thing that's forgotten a lot because it's just so easy to fall into like the routine of daily life or whatever. But if you know how to deadlift a 135-pound barbell off of the ground, pick up the grocery bag the same way and you're not going to get hurt, So, doing sudden or like abrupt movements or just unnatural kind of form, I guess, in your daily activities, like that also bleeds into that injury risk again. So it's like, how to do it. You're here all the time. We love seeing you do it. You're killing it. So just continue to do it once you leave the gym, because you're not doing it for no reason. Right.
And statistically, I can't remember the numbers. This was so long ago. But there was a study done, and it was more people injured their backs in the gym loading and unloading the bars than actually performing the exercises. Because like they just like get in this awkward position to put a plate on.
Yeah.
And they're all hunched over and their spine's rounded. It's not stabilized. But when they go to do the exercise, it's like you're thinking about it. You're like, okay, my form's going to be really, really good here.
Like 30
and then
seconds later.
yeah, exactly. And then they do the exercise and then they're fatigued. And then they go bend over to put a plate on, and it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
Right?
I've seen
And
the
then
same thing with kettlebells too. They'll do a perfect kettlebell like deadlift or something. And then when they go to put the weight away after their exercise, then they reach down to pick it up with a rounded back and they're not using their core. Like, stop. Use that same form. Like, use that in the gym, use it throughout your day, whether you're picking up kids or picking up groceries, whatever it is. Use good form, maintain good posture, try not to sit for long periods of time. There's a lot of things you can do. One of the things we didn't talk about, if there is something going on like with your back, or if you have any injuries and there's inflammation, is trying to stay away from foods that cause inflammations or that can trigger that inflammation. So that could be highly processed foods, refined sugars, alcohol, like all of that can contribute to inflammation. So maintaining, a solid diet can help as well.
Yeah. And stretching, that is something that I neglected for years and years. And then when we started our stretch therapy here, and I was like, okay, I got to get trained in this. And we were stretching each other. And I was like, this is very weird. Like my back just strangely, I haven't even thought about it. It's not bothering me at all. And that was very eye-opening to me of when you have a back injury, like current back injury, a lot of times stretching is not a good protocol because you can actually irritate it more. But from a prehab standpoint, it's like, I need to be flexible and my body needs to not associate a limb being taken to its end range of motion as a threat. It needs to be comfortable with that because a lot of times our body also has protective mechanisms built into the muscle tissue, into our muscle spindles, where if I get to an end range of motion, it's like I'm either going to get inhibition or my muscle is going to be like, nope, sorry, we're not going to do that. And it's going to kick out. And then there's like a negative response from that, from at a muscle tissue level. So, the stretch in your mobility is also wildly important.
Yes.
That's what I've come to learn from
Kobe Bryant said his number one regret in his entire career, and he's, mentally driven dude. Like, he doesn't have regrets, that guy. The one thing he said was he would have stretched more.
Yeah.
And that's that preventative, essentially an injury ended his career in the end. And he said that was the one thing that he would change.
Yeah.
Just taking care of it.
So, all right, guys, well, we'll leave it there. The back is a very complex system. We could talk about all the way down to very fine details. But number one, is if there's no back injury, let's prevent it, right? If there is a back injury, let's not let it hold you back, right? Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of things that we can do. And when it's really bad, it's like it's hard to sit, it's hard to stand, it's hard to sleep, all the things. So we do want to prevent it at all costs, but we can also train, and we can also prevent it from happening again in the future. Like, the worst thing that you could do is like have a back injury and do nothing, then get weaker core, weaker hamstrings, weaker glutes, weaker hip flex, like all the things. And then you're just in this vicious cycle, making it more likely that it's going to happen again. Right. So it's much better to just like suck it up, work through the pain, which is not always it's definitely not the easy solution. But in the long run, that's going to be a much better investment. And, we'll work with you if you have something going on. Like, we're going to do no harm. That's our, philosophy. So, all right, guys, that's all we got. We'll be back next week with more great stuff. Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.